Gail Beal, and I'm a volunteer with the VA Pulmonary O'Neill Medical Center in Topeka, Kansas. Today is February 9th, 2006. As part of the Veterans History Project, I will be interviewing Thomas Harvey Hall, H-A-L-L. Tom lives at 616 Northwest 7th Street in Abilene, Kansas, and Tom's date of birth is October 8th, 1936. Tom served in the U.S. Navy from January 5th, 1955 through December 15th, 1958, and served during the Korean War. The locations where Tom was stationed and served began at Oakland, California, and in Oakland is where he enlisted. Then he went to boot camp at San Diego, California, went to aircraft familiarization, I'm glad I got that word right, in Oklahoma, and then to electronics training in Memphis, Tennessee. And then he was stationed at Barbers Point, Hawaii, and became and went through his VP 28 training there, and actually was kind of homed out of Barbers Point, Hawaii from that point on. But he did two long cruises, one to Kodiak, Alaska, that lasted 6 months, and he will tell us about that cruise. And then later in his service, he also did another cruise to the Kwajalein Atoll, which is in the Pacific Ocean. And then after he finished his tour of duty, he went back to Hawaii and then back to Oakland, where he was dismissed. During the time that he was in the service, he achieved the rank of First Class Petty Officer, which is also called an AT-1 Greatest Service. In the room with us today is Skip Cook, our cameraman. So that kind of tells where we are. And Tom, we are ready for you to tell us about your life. So
Okay.
start off telling us where you were born and raised, and tell us what happened to you throughout your lifetime.
Well, I was born in Portland, Oregon. I couldn't tell you much about Portland, Oregon, because I left there when I was 6 months old. My mother and father got divorced right after I was born. And then she returned to her home roots in Oakland, California. And so basically I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
And what was your mother's maiden name?
You're going to make me stop and think. Anita Mildred Bakey.
Spell it.
B-A-I-K-I-E.
Okay. And did you have some brothers or sisters?
Yes, I did. From my mother's marriage, I had a brother, Gilbert Rowland Hall. He's 2 years older than me. And then my father remarried, and he had 5 more children. So I have 5 stepbrothers and sisters, 2 sisters and 3 brothers. Jackie Ariel Hall was the oldest. Janice, don't remember her middle name, Hall, and she had a twin, Jim Hall. And then there was John Hall and Jared Hall. He was originally, I don't remember his original name, but he changed it anyway, because all the other brothers and sisters had their names beginning with J, so he chose Jared.
Now, did you ever live with those brothers and sisters?
Off and on, not with the brothers and sisters. My sister was 12 when I was, after I was married.
I see.
So there's a large separation between
I
me
gotcha.
and the step-siblings.
Mhm.
But
So you moved to Oakland, California.
Mhm. And I went back and forth there between my mother and my father. Lived with my mother for a while, then with my father for a while, back with my mother again, and then finally went to Richmond, California with my father, where I went from the 5th grade through high school. And right after high school, I started college at UC Berkeley in Berkeley, California. And I didn't do very well. I made straight A's easily in high school. And when I went to college, I had never really learned to study. So I wound up failing everything except for military. I had joined the ROTC, NROTC, excuse me. And there I was getting an A. So I was failing in everything but this one course. And I decided that I might as well just go join the Navy. So I dropped out of school and joined the Navy in January of '55. And they sent me to San Diego for my boot training. I was there 8 weeks. And from there, they gave me a battery of tests, and it seemed my aptitude was for electronics. And my father was an electronic engineer, so that was natural. And so they decided they send me there. But first they also decided that I should become what we call an Airedale. In other words, the Navy branch of the, Air Force branch of the Navy is what I should say. And they sent me to aircraft familiarization in Oklahoma. That was about an 8-week course. And then they sent me to Memphis, Tennessee for my electronic training. And that one was 28 weeks, so I was there quite a while. And I was top in my class at that time, and so I was able to choose my next duty station. And I wound up going to Barbers Point, Hawaii, which is 30 miles west of Honolulu.
But that wasn't your first choice.
No, that wasn't my first choice.
Tell us about your first choice.
I wanted to go to Europe, is where I really wanted to go. But there wasn't a European choice available. So I said, okay, I'll take Hawaii. That sounds
poor
great.
baby, poor baby.
And right after I made my choice, they came out with, well, it's somewhere in Africa. Anyway, with cruises every weekend to Paris and places like this.
Oh man, tough duty.
So I was a little upset over that, but it turned out it was good duty in Hawaii. But I got there, unfortunately, right after they had completed the Japanese tour. So I never got to Japan. That would have been interesting. The first cruise we went on, the squadrons always went out for 6 months at a time to advanced places. And the first one we went on was to Kodiak, Alaska. And it was kind of interesting is we were off in the sticks pretty much on an island. The closest Alaskan city was Anchorage. And I never actually got there. I pretty much stayed on the base and did things around the base. But we had some interesting little things that happened. You know how kids are, they see too many westerns. It so happens that because we're in an advanced base, we had to have guards that were armed, and they armed them with 38s, pistols. Well, they decided that, golly, gee, it'd be fun to play Russian roulette.
Oh my Lord.
Well, fortunately they got caught before anything went wrong. And the commander, of course, read them the Riot Act, and he decided then that he was going to issue M1 rifles to him, and he told him, let's see you play Russian roulette with these. And one of the biggest things that they did up there for recreation was hunting, or Kodiak bear for one, the largest bear in the world as far as I knew at the time. I was never much into that sort of thing, so I pretty well stayed around the base. Others went into Kodiak itself, which is a small fishing village. Not much there, but that and hiking and that sort of thing was the main things they did there.
And what was your reason to be in Kodiak? What was the purpose of your mission while you were there?
The purpose of the squadron being there was to fly ice reconnaissance, keep track of where the ice pack was because of shipping up north of Alaska. And they had to know just where the ice was so they wouldn't get stuck somewhere. And also, at the same time, this was during the Cold War with Russia. So they were interested in reconnaissance of ships. So we'd fly by and take pictures of any shipping that we saw there. And we'd fly about 50 feet off the water and fly by the ships and take pictures. The ordnancemen in the crew would be the ones to take the pictures. And we had a couple of interesting things happen there. We saw a tugboat that we flew by it, and the skipper of the tugboat, he's up on the bridge following us with a rifle.
No!
And then we came upon a submarine. We were taking pictures of it. The skipper of that ship, hi, as we flew by.
Well, was it a Russian sub?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And tell us how you, what your daily tasks would be and how many were in the crew of this aircraft. Tell us a little bit about the aircraft.
What we were flying in was P2V Neptunes. You don't see too many of them around anymore. They pretty well disappeared after the 1959 and were replaced by the P3 Orions, which they're still using today. The plane was had two piston engines, and it had two jet engines, and it could fly just as well on the two jet engines as it could on its two piston engines. Give it the main purpose of the jets was to help them take off on short runways. And we had an interesting challenge while we were up in Alaska. The Air Force has a big base up near Fairbanks, Alaska, and they challenged our crew as to how soon we could take off. So they got on the plane, turned up all the jets, put the engines up to max, and they were off the runway in half the length of the runway. In fact, at the middle of the runway, they were already at 1,000 feet.
Oh my goodness.
So the plane had plenty of power.
Mm-hmm.
And its cruising range was somewhere between 200 and 400. I think 400 was its max. It'd take about 10 hours to fly from the San Francisco Bay Area to Honolulu, which at that time was an average speed. Of course, today they do it in a blink of an eye, but it was a very, very good aircraft. Had very few real problems with them.
And how many were in the crew and what were their duties?
Okay, the crew consisted of 3 officers. One was the pilot, one was the co-pilot, and the third one was the navigator. And he had a table right on the wing, or just forward of the wing, excuse me. And I was a radarman, and I sat right next to him, just forward of him. And behind the wing was the radio man. And then we had 2 ordnancemen as well, so there is, let's see, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, radarman, radioman, and 2 ordnance, and there was 7 in the crew.
And did you pretty much stay with the same crew the whole time that you were in service?
The whole time I was flying as crew, yes. Yeah, I was in the plane 7, which would be crew 7. And the pilot was the operations officer of the squadron. And he had some interesting things that happened after I got out of the crew. We had a lieutenant come into the squadron. He came to us from flying jets where they had thrown him out of the squadron. And while he was taking off from Barbers Point, he had a runaway engine. I believe it was the right engine. And when that happens, you feather the engine and pull the power back on it, and then you fly around and land on one engine. Well, they feathered the engine okay. Then the pilot ordered the power to be drawn off of it so it wouldn't catch on fire. He pulled back the power on the good engine. And here they are, they're heading right towards the housing units there on the base.
God.
All the pilot could do is just dip his wing and drop on the runway.
Oh.
The plane broke into 7 pieces. Nobody was injured except the pilot, and all he did was cut a ligament in his finger. He was an excellent pilot. There's a few other things that happened. One up in Alaska, in fact both of them were in Alaska. When we flew up there the first time, the island was socked in by fog. And there was a volcano there. This is on Adak Island. There's a volcano right next to the runway.
And spell that, the name of that island.
Adak, A-D-A-K.
Okay.
And we came in on ground control approach radar. On glide path, they're saying, on glide path. Then we break out of the clouds, and here's the mountain dead ahead of us.
Oh my gracious.
Needless to say, once they got on the ground, the pilot went up and had a little talk with the ground approach people. And after that, they became the best of buddies. Then on another occasion, they flew each crew one time on rest and recreation, R&R they call it, to Whidbey Island in Washington. And again, we had to come in and ground control approach. And the fog was almost right onto the deck. We had probably 50 feet between the bottom of the fog and the ground, and we had 50 feet of wing out to the side. The wingspan of the plane is 100 feet, so about 50 feet to each side. And when he broke through and could see the ground, the runway was off to his right.
Oh.
All he could do was dip the wing, and mind you, 50 feet with 50 feet of wing.
Yeah.
So that was kind of hairy, and all he did is just slide it in onto the ground.
Oh.
Excellent pilot. And nobody was hurt, nothing happened to the plane. That would have been heck if something had happened when we were there for rest and recreation.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, what was your job on the plane?
I was running the radar.
And tell us what that means.
Radar is, what does it stand for? Anyway, radar sends out pulses of energy, and it gets reflected back from anything metallic.
Mm-hmm.
And then it displays this on a screen, and you can tell what's out there and where it is out there from that.
You could detect just even a periscope. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the radar was designed to pick up the periscope on a submarine. Lots of energy was sent out there, a lot of energy. And from that, then we had other things we could do to pinpoint where the sub was and where it was going. We could drop sonobuoys into the water, and we'd get the sonar, the radio man acted as a sonar man.
Mm.
And by listening, he could tell, triangulate on the sub and figure out where it was and follow it and see where it's going, what speed, that sort of thing.
And then when you identified that there was a sub in the water, then you communicated with somebody else, didn't you?
Yes, they usually had a control plane flying around the clock, as a matter of fact, 24 hours a day. And there would be more than one of our planes in on these exercises. And they would direct us, and we'd report to them, and then they'd tell us what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was in time of war, we could have also deployed a weapon. But I was in post-Korean era, so we never had to deploy any weapons.
And did you fly every day, or how often did
no,
you go out on these missions?
There were 12 crews, so the rotation wasn't all that bad.
Mhm.
They probably had 2 of the planes up at a time, each having 1 of 2 areas to go to. If we were flying reconnaissance for the shipping, we'd go off the western side of Alaska. If we were doing ice reconnaissance, we'd go north of Alaska.
Mhm.
So there'd be 2 planes out there normally daily. And what would that be? That'd be every 6th day, about once a week we'd have a cruise.
Mhm.
And
then how long would that cruise last?
about 8 hours.
Uh-huh.
The plane we'd probably cover 3,000 to 4,000 miles
Wow.
in that period of time. For the shipping reconnaissance, we'd go across the international date line. We couldn't go too far beyond that because of a lot of the waters were claimed by Russia.
Mm.
So part of the Aleutian Islands was claimed by Russia.
Mhm.
And Adak was pretty close to where that was. If we were doing the shipping reconnaissance, we'd fly out of Adak. If we were doing the ice reconnaissance, we'd fly out of Kodiak.
Mhm.
So we had those 2 bases that we worked out of.
And you were telling me that the Fahrenheit temperature there varied greatly. Tell us about that, because that really surprised me.
Excuse me. Well, I understand that the temperatures in Fairbanks, Alaska varied from about 50 below to around 120 during the summer. It had a very wide range.
That is just incredible.
I can vouch for the 50 below, although it was only 10 below when I got there.
Mm.
But I didn't know anything about Alaska, so I was wearing my light summer flight suit that we wore down in Hawaii when we got there. And I stepped off that plane and I froze.
Not bad.
In order to keep the engines warm, when the planes were in the hangar, they'd have these huge heater ducts. They'd have one of these ducts on each engine. And I spent my whole time up there standing underneath one of these heater ducts.
So they never did issue you a jacket or something?
No, we weren't. We were only there for the 1 day. So.
Oh, I see.
And of course, nobody decided to tell us what the temperature was up there.
Uh-huh.
And being a young buck, probably about 18 at the time, maybe 19 by that time, I didn't think anything about it. You know, you are that when you're that young.
So you were up there about 6 months in all.
Yeah. We were there through the winter and part of the spring.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a fairly quiet time, except for those 2 incidents I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very interesting cruise. The plane had a clear nose cone for observation. And being we were flying over land at the time, my radar was useless, too much energy to use for navigation over land. So I had nothing to do, and I asked permission to sit in the nose cone for the ride. So I flew all the way back from Fairbanks, Alaska to Kodiak, sitting in that nose cone. That was a beautiful flight.
Mm.
The Brooks Range were, who was the author that wrote all about Alaska? Jack London.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned this Brooks Range, and I was amazed at how sharp the peaks of these mountains were.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could see lakes off to either side, and then we flew by Mount McKinley, so I could see the glaciers on the side of the mountain. Beautiful flight, enjoyed it tremendously.
And how long of a flight, what is that, in
Um,
that plane?
At that time, it wasn't all that long a flight to Fairbanks.
Couple hours then? Or
Yeah,
something?
2 or 3 hours, something
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
Where if we were going out on an actual mission, it'd be between 4 and 8 hours.
Mhm, mhm. So then you headed back to Hawaii,
Mm-hmm.
and you were there for a little while, and then you were sent out on another cruise.
Yeah, we were given the task of patrolling around the area where they were doing the atom bomb tests. And I was not a crewman during that particular cruise. I was ground maintenance on the radars.
And so what island were you stationed at that during those 6 months?
Kwajalein Atoll.
Mm-hmm.
And from there we'd fly out around Bimini Atoll and Eniwetok. And in the Eniwetok area, I believe, is where the bomb tests itself were.
And what was the purpose of your cruise, of your mission during those 6 months?
Primarily to keep people out of that area where the tests were going to be made. You had your, I think it was the Greenpeace. They like to try and stop you by putting their ships in harm's way. And then, of course, there was the Russians keeping tab on what we were doing. Mm-hmm. We'd go out and find these different people trying to get in the area and send out ships to send them away.
Mm-hmm. And so again, did you go out about every 6 days on that cruise also?
Yeah, like I said, there's 12 planes in the squadron.
Mm-hmm.
And they had 2 different courses that they would follow. Now whether I can't remember at this point whether they flew both tracks or whether it depended upon where the actual test was being made.
Mm-hmm. And you flew kind of a grid, didn't you?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I was not really too familiar with that other than what shows in the book there.
Mm-hmm.
That they would fly north a ways, then they'd go west a ways, and come south a ways, and so on, and then back to Kwajalein again.
So that you could cover the entire area.
Right.
And know that there was nobody around when those tests were being done, so that they wouldn't be subjected to the radiation and so on.
Plus our planes were out there during the actual explosion.
Mm.
So when they came back, they had to go through all sorts of processes to remove any radiation, and each crew member had to go through a similar process. And
so what did it look like if you were up above and you could see it down below when the tests were?
You don't look at it when it goes off. It's too bright.
I see.
Whether they gave, I assume they had glasses of some sort to filter it out.
But they told you when it was about to go off and everybody was to look away.
I assume so.
Uh-huh.
Like I say, I was not flying the planes at that time. I was
That's right. You were maintenance.
Yeah. When they came back, squawk didn't work, and then I'd go out and repair it.
I see.
I was a second class petty officer at that time, so I had some people working under me. I didn't usually have to go out on the plane itself. I'd send out the other people.
And you were there 6 months for that cruise also.
Yeah, that's the standard cruise length for the patrol squadrons.
And you suffered some hearing loss during those years that you were in the service, didn't you? Tell us about that.
I don't know how many people have been around reciprocating engines. They're pretty noisy, and well above what they now know will harm the ear. They made earplugs available, but they didn't really know much about it at the time. Some of us wore them, some of us didn't. Later it became mandatory, and you could get called on the carpet if you didn't. At that time, they were just learning all of this stuff. And the actual loss, although I noticed it probably within 10 years, the worst actual loss didn't occur until much later, probably 20 or 30 years. 20 or 30 years afterwards. And then I went to apply to try and get some hearing aids, and one doctor decided that it wasn't bad enough for hearing aids, and then I tried to look up my records so I could prove that there was a hearing loss, and they lost my records. One group said they had sent it over to this place, another group said it was sent there, nobody knew where it was. Finally, they decided they would pat me on the back and say you can have the minimum disability payment for it. So that's kind of, it's amazing that they can even keep records as long as they do and find them. Let's face it, that was almost getting on 50 years now, and paperwork that nobody looked at during that period of time. It's a wonder they can find it at all.
That's true.
And then I got out of the service in December of 1958, and I decided to pursue my electronics career. And the first company I worked for was a tape manufacturer. I don't remember their name right now. And
When you say tape, what kind of tape?
magnetic tape.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
They manufactured commercial tape recorders is what
I
they
see.
did.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they had several versions of these tape recorders, but they're all big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably seen in pictures this 6 foot tall cabinet
Oh, yeah.
with big reels of tape. That's the sort of thing they manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
And they were about the biggest manufacturer at the time. So I went to work for them.
And where were you living at this point?
At that point, I was living in Redwood City
So you're still in
in
California?
California, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's on the San Francisco Peninsula.
Mm-hmm. And had you met your
south
wife yet by then?
No, I hadn't. I met her at just about that time.
Uh-huh.
And the strange thing about that is she was born in Hilo, Hawaii.
Oh, my goodness.
And while I was in Hawaii, I flew right over her city.
Oh, baby.
And on one Armed Forces Day, our squadron was involved in a flyby in the islands. And we were flying about 4,000 feet along all the islands in the chain. And of course, Hilo was one of them we went by.
Uh-huh.
And I had just purchased a new Argus C3 camera, 35 millimeter camera. I was so proud of that camera. And I was reading the book the day before this flight, and it said you could change the lenses. So of course I had to try. So I took the lens off and I put it back. Oh, that's great. I'll have to get me another lens, a telephoto lens. So off I went on this flight. We're flying 4,000 feet now, remember? And I was taking something like 4 or 5 rolls of pictures. And when I got back, I sent them all in to be developed. And they sent the film back and said, there's nothing on them.
Oh.
I said, what? Then I come to realize that when I put the lens back, I was 180 degrees out. So when I had it set for infinity, it was set for 0.
Oh, no.
Oh, here I am flying at 1,000 feet with it set for 0.
Oh, dear.
So that was a learning session. And the film was something like $5 a reel at that time, so I lost about $25. Plus, I never was able to go on another one of those flights.
Yeah, you missed the pictures, that's the
Right.
biggest thing.
That I learned from that. Then when I was up in Alaska and went on this rest and recreation thing, I was a young guy and didn't realize how easy it was for people to steal things from you. I put things in my locker at this general building where your people who were in and out stayed. Came back, camera was gone.
Oh.
Didn't learn my lesson though. I put my wallet in there while I went out. Came back, it was gone.
Oh, my.
3 times
Oh,
I let
goodness.
him hit me before
Was there no way to lock it?
There was, but being young and stupid, you know, took me 3 times to learn that lesson.
You're just a trusting soul, Tom.
But I finally learned it.
Oh dear, that's sad. So you got back and you were working for this electronics company in California,
Right.
and about that time you met this sweet young thing.
As it turned out, my mother worked for my next door neighbor of my mother worked at Montgomery Ward's in Oakland,
Oh.
and my future wife was working there also in the same department as the next door neighbor. So she was playing Cupid.
I see.
She had set up a date for us, and everything went from there. Found out she was from Hawaii, but she had moved here in 1955. So I was going this way when she was coming to California. And she came aboard the Lurleen. It was probably the biggest, most luxurious ship they had going back and forth at that time. And she was just a young girl. She was still in high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And she graduated from high school in Oakland, California. And that's about the time I met her, right after she had graduated.
So she moved over with her family?
With her stepmother. Her
I see.
father had passed away.
I see.
And that's when I met her, is through the intervention of my mother's neighbor. And our first date was down to Santa Cruz, and we went to the beach there. Well, again, I'm fair-skinned, and it was a windy day, not a lot of sun, but it was a very windy day. And as a result of that first date, my face for 1 week after that was one big scab.
Oh. So you got a bad windburn as well as sunburn.
Exactly. It was, which is worse, 3rd degree or 1st degree? Anyway, it's the worst type of burn. I could have gone to
Third.
hospital for it.
Oh, man.
But I sat there for 1 week with Dumbaro tablets and a keg of ice in water, soaking my face to pull all the heat out.
Oh. Well, you got a bad sunburn another time while you were actually in service. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes. When I was down at Kwajalein Atoll for the bomb tests, one of the first things I did when I got there, I went for a walk around the island. I enjoyed walking and hiking. Only thing stupid I did, amongst other things, was wear shorts. So this island happens to be between the Tropic of, it's either Cancer or Capricorn anyway, and the equator. Very hot area. So, of course, I came back with a nice sunburn. And as luck would have it, the pharmacy on the island did not have any sunburn lotion. The ship hadn't come in yet. So they had the mess hall brew up a bunch of very strong tea. And the acid that's in tea is what they put in sunburn lotion. So I sat there for about a week, coating myself with tea. Kind of a sticky mess, but it did the job. And
So was your girlfriend impressed by your scabby face then the first week after you?
oh, she thought she'd never see me again.
But she did see you again.
Oh yes, we were married in 1959, about a year after I met her. We were married in Oakland at the little cozy church around the corner. That was the name of the place.
I'll be darned.
I even remember his name was Reverend Ruggles.
And what was your wife's maiden name?
Baptiste.
Oh, what's her first name?
Beverly.
Beverly Baptiste.
Portuguese.
I'll be darned.
Yes, her parents were almost pure Portuguese.
I'll bet she's a beautiful girl.
Yeah. olive skin and so on. And we got along quite well, and like I say, we got married in December, as a matter of fact, of 1959, December 11. And things progressed from there. And of course, soon after, we had a young boy, and then 2 years after that, his sister was born. That's the only 2 children I've had personally. Since then, my daughter has had 4 children of her own, so there's 4 grandkids. My son, he had only 1 child of his own, but he also inherited some. So wound up with 5 more grandchildren
Oh,
there.
that's wonderful.
So that's 10 grandchildren. And one of my daughter's children had a child, so now we also have 1 great-grandchild.
Uh-huh.
And he's back in California now.
So you and Beverly lived in California for a while, but then eventually you moved away from California. Tell us about
Yeah,
your life then.
that's quite strange the way things happen there. Like I say, I lived most of my life in the San Francisco Bay Area. Well, after we married, we lived in Oakland to start with. Then we went to a little town a little further east. We stayed there about a year, and then we moved into Hayward where we bought a house. And I was there for about 6 or 7 years. And I lost track of what I was saying.
During that
Oh,
time.
and then during that period, I decided I was going to go back in the service.
Oh, yeah.
So I decided, well, I'll go back and into the reserves. They had what they call the active reserve. So I was going to go back into that. Well, they didn't tell me too much. I signed up and then found out that I had to first get my rating back. Okay, well, how long does that take? Oh, 2 or 3 years. No, I did it in about 6 months. I had my rating back. So I said, okay, I'm ready to go. Give me a station. Sorry, they're not taking anybody now.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. Well, now here I am. I've enlisted for 2 years, and nothing's going the way I wanted. But then they came up with their cruise, which they do once a year. And this time it was down to Panama. So, okay, I'll take a flight down there with the squadron. So I enjoyed that. We were there about 2 weeks. And I got to go back and forth from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And that was enjoyable. Then I came back and I said, this is getting me nowhere. So I went home and I left it at that. Well, of course, they threatened me, we're going to dishonorably discharge you and all this kind of stuff. And after it was all over, they sent me an honorable discharge. So that was the end of my Navy career. Continuing with my civilian career, from the tape company, I decided to move back into the East Bay Area again, into Oakland. And that was after I married my wife. And I went to work for RCA, putting up TV antennas. And that was kind of an interesting thing. I was afraid of heights to start with. And what they do, they put me in all these 2 to 4 story buildings with ladders that, rock a little bit. One place they sent me to was the hangars at the Alameda Naval Air Station. That one was about 4 stories up. So I got up there okay. And it took everything I had in order to coax me back onto the ladder to go down. I got through that. Then I went into West Oakland. And this was kind of a slum area of Oakland. Houses were very old and so on. I put the ladder up, started climbing it, and the ladder started settling through the eaves. So I said, nope, I can climb back down. And I said, I'm not going up there. Well, the guy that was with me, he didn't think anything. He was done and back down. And then they sent me to a 3-story house in Alameda. It was 3 tiers. And I got up onto the first roof level, put my ladders up onto the second and froze. I couldn't go any further. So I climbed back down and went and resigned that
Yeah,
job.
this isn't the job for me.
Right. And of course, at one other place, I put the ladder up on the front of the house. It's only a single-story dwelling, piece of cake.
Uh-huh.
Started up the ladder, got about 2/3 of the way to the roof, the ladder slipped out. And I had wound up on the ground with my legs wrapped around the ladder. I thought sure I'd broken both legs, but as it turned out it wasn't. Then I said, okay, well I gotta finish this job. Walked around to the back, here's the fence, here's the roof line. I could step from the roof onto the back roof of the house. I just didn't walk around enough to see what was going on.
Yeah.
So, okay, and then I left that job, that was enough. And where did I go from there? I think I joined a company, eventually became part of Xerox.
Mm.
And it was a manufacturing plant making printers.
Oh.
And at this time, it was still the old type where you had the keys going up and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, they went into the first inkjet printers.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, they made me a supervisor on a line with about 10 women working under me.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed that job very much. But unfortunately, I had 2 women that you had to stand over the top of them to get them to do their job.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 2 women, I could just say, do this, this, and this, and they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the 2 women that were very good were black ladies. And they, in fact, I had to stand over these others. They said this was discrimination.
Oh, no.
So I lost that job. They put me back on the line again. And I was with them probably 8 years altogether. And then they came up with a optional retirement,
Mm-hmm.
which I accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Reno, Nevada. My wife stayed in California. She didn't particularly want to go to Reno. But while I was in Reno, Nevada, I went to work for a company called Lear Fan Corporation. And they were building a new Lear jet. And this was a very interesting one. I was working as a technician on the line. And what we were doing was developing test equipment to put in the plane to test its flight parameters.
Mm.
And I enjoyed that job very much. I worked for them for 2 years. And while I was at Xerox, I had also started taking college courses from Phoenix. I don't even remember the name of the university now. University of Phoenix, UOP. That's what it was. And they had these people who would come out and set up courses at your place of business.
Oh.
So I went to that. I wrote something like 22 essays on different things to get credit on different courses.
Mm-hmm.
So I got through all of the first 3 years of course material that way. And then I took business administration as the last courses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, while I was in Reno, I got the degree. It came through at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then since my wife wanted to stay in the Bay Area, I came back and I found a job with, golly, my mind's failing me, Heald College.
Mm.
The Heald Institute of Technology was the actual name at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in Concord, California. So I started teaching there, teaching basic electricity and algebra.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably had the largest class that any teacher ever had. There were 60 students in the class.
Oh, wow.
And that was in a class designed for 30. As a net result, I had to be very careful where I walked and what I did. Otherwise, I'd be in somebody's face.
Mm-hmm.
And I I got through that. I worked for them for about 5 years, I guess. And then they decided that teachers were costing them too much. So they downgraded the course and downgraded the what they were going to pay the instructors. So all the older instructors had to go one by one. And then the only job I found around at the time was working for U.S. Steel. It was actually a corporation that was part U.S. Steel and part Pohang, Korea Steel.
Oh.
So they called the company USS POSCO. And I worked for them for about 8 years.
8 years.
By that time, the pay I was getting, I just couldn't find a job in my normal field that would pay me as much. I didn't particularly care for the job. It was dirty work. What I was doing there, they had the steel mill in one area, and about a mile away were the lines that developed the steel.
I see.
So in between them was this big storage area, and that's where I was working. So we had railroad cars, automated cars, that would go to the mill itself, pick up the coils and bring them into our storage area. And then we'd pick them up again and deliver them to the 3 different lines.
I see.
And each of these coils of steel weighed about 15 to 35 tons.
Oh my golly.
Yeah. So the cars themselves, of course, were pretty sturdy. They were 8 tons each.
Oh goodness.
And it was a rail line. It would come down to our area. We had a turntable there. The car would go onto the turntable. We could either send it back to go pick up another coil, or we could send it on down the line. Then there was another turntable there, which would send it to one of the 3 lines. And I was maintaining this automated system. And a lot of the time I was on my hands and knees and oil and gunk and so on. And it's a 480 volt system. And naturally I managed to get shocked by it once.
Ooh.
And
That would just about stop your heart, wouldn't it?
it could have, but I never really got a hold of it before it threw me away,
Praise the Lord.
which was fortunate. I was a little, shaky for a while. That was about it. And then they had these cranes that would, I guess the crane must have been 15 feet high, just to get up to the platform level. And you had these straight ladders you'd climb up to get onto it.
Of course, we know you don't like heights too well anyway.
Actually, while I was there, I learned to have it not bother me that much. It took a couple of years, but because everything was high, I finally got over that.
Yeah.
And this one time I was going up the ladder and my hand slipped. And behind me was 2 or 3 of these coils. And so the only thing I could do was just grab again. And I did. I had to overstretch to do it. And of course, I hurt my shoulders. And I wound up with a disability out of that. And retired shortly afterwards. And since 1997, I've been retired.
Now, how did it come that you moved then from California to, did you move directly to Kansas?
No. From the Bay Area, we went to Contra Costa County in Antioch, which is a major town up there, right on the Sacramento River. And Pittsburgh was just a little ways west of there, and then Concord was west of there. And I had a home in each of those 3 places.
I see.
And then in Concord, I was living in Concord about the time I got hurt. And of of course, it takes a year to a year and a half to get all the legalities taken care of. And of course, meantime, the money wasn't available, in other words. So I wound up having to move in with my daughter in Pittsburgh.
And how old is your daughter by this point in time?
At that point, she was probably in her 30s. She had all 4 children by that time. And lived there for about a year and a half before things finally got settled. In the meantime, my son was living in Lemoore, California. There's a big Navy base there, fighter base area. And he asked if we could come down and help him with his business. So that prompted us to move south. We wound up settling in Hanford, California, which is about 7 miles east of Lemoore. And then I started doing some genealogy at that time, and I found out that my grandmother had lived in Hanford. She was there in 1910, and she had 3 of her 4 children at that time. And he was working for Standard Oil Company, going out to the different rigs and inspecting them. And well, then we decided that, in fact, my son's business folded. So he took off, and he had some property further south in California, and he lost that. And then he also wound up getting divorced. And so he was pretty upset about all of this, and he just took off and moved to Kansas, is where he wound up. He wound up in Clay Center, Kansas. And then about a year after he had done that, the landlord sold our house out from under us in Hanford. So I said, Troy, we're coming. So we moved to Kansas. And then he moved to Iowa.
Oh my goodness. But you discovered what wonderful people we Kansans are, and you stayed, didn't you?
Yeah. My daughter moved to Abilene, and then we moved in with her. And it's very likely she's going to be making a move soon, moving to New Jersey. She's met a guy on the internet that the 2 of them seem to be getting along fabulous. And my grandson is also living with us. And he's been on the internet with a gal from Russia.
Oh my goodness.
And it looks like they're going to become a number.
I'll be darned.
So he's talking now about moving to Russia.
Oh my gracious.
So the family's kind of splitting apart again.
So Tom, do you think that if your daughter does move to New Jersey, are you going to stay in the Abilene area?
I think so.
So you like it there?
Yeah, so the nice thing about Abilene, Kansas has a real problem with storms. Tornadoes and snow and rain and hail. Well, for some stupid reason, the tornadoes all go north of Abilene and south of Abilene. We got a little snow, but it lasts about 3 days and it's gone.
Now, how long have you lived in that area?
1 year. We've been through that one complete set of seasons.
Yeah.
And if we go to Topeka, Topeka is horrendous for all the storms it gets.
Oh, we get a lot, yes,
Yeah.
here, we do.
And same thing if I go to Manhattan, they see a lot of the storms and snow. And we went there to one evening for dinner, and it started raining. And I mean, that rain was horizontal.
Yeah.
We stepped out to go to our car, and we were drenched by the time we reached our car. And so that made us start looking at Abilene as kind of a nice area, even though it's there isn't a whole lot of stuff there.
Well, it is the birthplace of Dwight Eisenhower.
That it is.
It's a very nice town.
Also, the Stover Candy Factory is there.
Oh, yeah.
And in California,
Russell
we
Stovers.
always saw Whitman candy sampler.
It's the same thing.
It's the same company.
Mhm.
And I lost my trend again.
Well, the other thing that's in Abilene is the Brookville Hotel Restaurant. Isn't that in Abilene now? Right on,
Yes, if it's the one I'm thinking of.
out on I-70.
It's very, very expensive, and the food isn't all that good.
Oh, it's too bad, because the only time I've ever eaten at the Brookville restaurant, it was wonderful.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, I've talked to a few people, and they said it isn't all that good for the money you pay.
Yeah.
So I haven't bothered to go there.
Well, I'm
We
sad-
have gone
sad
to a
hear
Taste
that.
of China, we seem to enjoy that,
Uh-huh.
although it's not as good as the Chinese restaurant in Junction City.
Mhm.
What do they call that? Family buffet.
Oh,
They've got twice as many foods at the family buffet
Mhm.
for the same price.
Mhm.
I would take the family buffet over the Taste of China,
Mhm.
but both are good.
Now, do you have grandchildren that live in that area that might stay in that area?
No, we're the only ones in Kansas now.
I see.
But I was still doing genealogy while I was here
Mhm.
and trying to trace down my maternal grandmother.
Mhm.
And she was born in Fulton, Kansas.
Oh.
And so I started looking this up. I got hold of old issues of the Fulton Independent newspaper.
Uh-huh.
It has a gossip column in there. And I started reading this, and my great-grandfather's family was mentioning this almost every week. It
And
was
tell
a weekly
us
paper.
their names.
Well, my grandmother was, oh Lord, Annette Bakey, Clara Annette Bakey was her name.
Spell her.
B-A-I-K-I-E.
B-A-I-K-I-E. Okay.
Excuse me, Clara Annetta McGuire. Her maiden
Okay.
name is McGuire.
Okay.
Okay, so she's of Irish descent, obviously.
Mhm.
How far back I'd have to go to get to Ireland, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Haven't traced it that far yet. I was more interested in getting my great-grandfather down pat.
Mhm.
Come to find out, he was born in Bangor, Maine. And his wife was born in Maryland.
Oh.
And they got married in Chicago,
Oh, be darn.
okay? And this was just before the Civil War.
Uh-huh.
So, of course, he enlisted in the Civil War in the Chicago Cavalry Group. And he went all over the country in that war. And he got crippled in the war.
Mm.
And then, right after the war, he came here to Kansas
Mhm.
and settled in Kansas.
Mhm.
Whether this was through a land grant or what, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But they lived on a farm just outside of Fulton, about 3 miles.
Mhm.
And my grandmother had 3 siblings. One of them, his name was Bertie. Her sister was my mind's gone blank on that. And the other brother was Frank.
Mhm.
Okay, and I found that her sister married another farmer who also happened to be a partner in a store in Fulton called D.A. Johnston's.
Mhm.
And every week they had an ad for D.A. Johnston in there. And I just followed this gossip column through about 6 to 10 years or more. And it was just like watching a movie on my family. And it was quite interesting.
Mhm.
And my great-grandfather, he died in 1901. She lost her 3 siblings several years before that. They all died of consumption.
Mhm.
Her mother died of cancer.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure what it was my great-grandfather died of. But anyway, I tried to then find out when my grandmother moved to California to meet her husband.
Mhm.
Haven't found that.
Mhm.
The gossip column went dry.
Oh,
Excuse me.
Lord.
But I know that she went to California, and I'm almost positive she stayed with some relatives by the name of Lacey. Her maiden name was Lacey.
L-A-C-Y?
Lacey.
L-A-C-E-Y.
Uh-huh. And then her husband came over from Scotland,
Mm.
and it looks like he made a couple of trips. He wanted her to go back with him to Scotland. She wouldn't do it.
Mm.
So he went back, and that didn't settle, so he came back again. And he went to work in California.
Mhm.
And like I say, in 1910, I found them living in Hanford.
Mhm.
And from that point on, they're pretty well documented it. But I can't find where they were married. I can't find where he was naturalized. And I can't find when she left Kansas.
Mhm.
Those are things I'm still trying to look up.
Mhm.
But I've pretty well documented their lives, and funny thing is, the way I was going was backwards through her life to the different towns.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, whatever works. Well, tell me, Tom, do you stay in contact with any of the fellas from your squadron from way back then?
No.
No? No? And what do you and your wife do these days for fun?
She's the real family historian.
Mm-hmm.
That's her main thing, is doing genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
But of course she's interested more in her side of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And she's traced them back to when they came over from, let's see, what's the group of islands? Part of Portugal, not the Canaries. There's another group of islands anyway, but the Azores.
Mm-hmm.
Azores. And it seems like there was two periods in history when the Portuguese came to Hawaii. And her relatives were amongst one of those groups.
Mm-hmm.
And they settled in Hawaii, worked on the plantations. And her father, he was not a bail bond, a credit collector.
Oh.
And then he got ill with cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, he moves back here. Her mother, right shortly after Pearl Harbor, her mother got run over by an army truck.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so she was only 3 at the time, so
Oh,
she
gracious.
never got to know her mother,
Oh,
which is kind of sad.
very sad.
And she regrets that very much.
Mm-hmm.
That she has some pictures of it and what her father went through to try and get compensation for that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you never really get full
Oh,
compensation.
no, no, no.
I think at the time they granted him something like $300.
Good heavens.
So she doesn't have very fond memories of Pearl Harbor at all.
No, no.
And in wars in general, she doesn't like to even watch films about it.
Mm-hmm.
But our prime thing we do now is, like I say, she does her genealogy on the computer, and I just kind of piddle around on the computer.
Do you guys like to travel or anything like that?
We want to, but we haven't been able to afford it,
Mm-hmm.
and we've had so much family around us,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the support for the family has come from us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they're getting themselves squared away.
You bet. Well, it sounds like they've got some exciting things on the horizon for
Oh,
both
yes.
of them.
Oh, yes.
Well, you've got some pictures here that you were going to show us a little bit about.
Okay.
And the best thing is to hold them straight up and down
I'll
so
try.
that the glare doesn't get.
Okay. I'll let him tell me how it looks.
Okay, yeah, you're doing fine.
This is the plane I flew in Hawaii. It's called the P-2V Neptune, built by Lockheed. That particular one happens to be P-2V-5F. They went through the version 7. Just about all of version 7 went to Japan. And instead of having the navy blue coating you see here, they were all silver.
Mm-hmm.
maybe they lost the blue paint.
So you said that each of these aircraft had two piston type engines, and that would be these two.
Yeah, when you see the
And
bellies.
and then I assume that the jets are the ones that are clear at the end of the wings.
No.
No.
They sit right beside it, right there.
Oh. Oh, down
You can
here.
see it better on the other wing.
Right here. I see.
Yeah, this right here is the jet on the other
I gotcha.
wing.
I gotcha.
But these are fuel tanks,
I see.
and one of them, you can't see it here. It has a searchlight on it,
I see.
about 1,000,000 candle watts.
Oh. So that
It's
people can
also
see.
designed to show up a periscope down in the ocean.
Uh-huh.
Very bright. You don't want to look at it.
And you said that in the tail of this had some pretty fancy electronics that could detect metal way deep into the ocean.
Yeah, it's a magnetic detection gear,
Mm-hmm.
and they put it way back here so the metal of the plane doesn't interfere with it.
I see.
And about 3,000 yards from the plane down into the ocean, depending on what altitude you're at, would determine how far into the ocean.
So you could see submarines that were very, very deep and so on.
Actually, for a submarine, it's very shallow. They have to be pretty near the surface before the detection gear would pick it up.
I see.
But it also carries sonobuoys, which they can drop in the water, and then that can hear them. And the radio man puts on earphones and listens to different sonobuoys, and they can tell what direction he's going and what speed. If we had to, they could drop a weapon if it was time of war. But
Luckily,
like I
you
said,
never
I
had to
was-
do that.
Right. We never even carried one in the airplane. We did carry sonobuoys, and we practiced looking for subs, using our own submarines. And we usually found them.
Yeah, I'll bet that's right. Tell us about this picture.
Okay, this one is basically the same airplane. It's from another squadron. I found this one in a tutorial on the P2V Neptune, history of the plane, and it pretty well shows that you can see the right in here. See that clear area? That's that floodlight I was telling you about. These tanks are removable. If they had to, they could drop them, but we never did. Never had to.
Now, when you said that you sat in the area where you could see the whole part of Alaska, was that at the very
Right at the very,
right at the very top?
the very tip here.
Tip? Oh man, that would
Okay.
yeah, you'd be able to see everything from up there.
And right up on top here, you can't see it in this photo, but there's a little bubble of glass. And the navigator could look up through there and shoot the stars to help him in his navigation.
I see.
We also had Loran gear sitting right beside him, which is long-range navigation. And they could triangulate on 2 radio stations, commercial radio stations, and that could tell them where they are.
Where they were.
So that was also a navigational age. This bubble right down here is the radar antenna.
Oh.
And my position was right above that, right about in here. And that's where the radar itself was. And there's a smaller deck right in here where the transmitter and receiver of the radar was at. And then right behind the wing is where the radio men sat. And then the 2 ordnance men were back here by this window that you can see. And that's where they took a lot of the photographs on surveillance hops.
I see.
Going, as you look at this wing, you can see it's right in the middle of the fuselage. So to go from the front to the back, it's a very tight fit. You have to go over the top of the wing.
Oh.
And if you're wearing a parachute, then you're usually scraping top and bottom as you're going across.
Oh boy.
And I had a situation where my monitor was not working. I don't exactly know what happened to it, but I pulled it out and I found some burned wires. And I traced the wire back. It went from here all the way to the tail and back up again before it got down into the bottom.
Oh,
And I had to replace that whole piece of wire.
oh boy.
And it's amazing how many miles of wire there is inside an airplane like this.
I don't doubt that at all.
And this by no means is as complex as the newer aircraft today.
Beautiful aircraft. Well, Tom, is there anything else that you can think of that you would like to tell us about your time in service or about your life or anything else?
Well, I just wish everybody the best of happiness and whatever they go into. It's going to be interesting watching, seeing how they progress, especially my grandson when and if he goes to Russia. And,
Oh, he'll have some stories. You bet, you bet.
And I've never gotten over to Europe. I always wanted to. And hopefully my wife and I will be able to get out and travel around this country
That'd be
and
wonderful,
see a little
wouldn't
more
it?
of it.
It sure would.
We've seen quite a few of the states, but
Uh-huh.
we've never stayed very long in any one place.
Yeah.
And of course, my brother's getting up in age, so I'd like to get down and see him again before too much time goes by.
And where does he live?
He lives in just northeast of Dallas.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he's in Texas. And his children are in Texas and Florida.
I
And
see.
he had 3 children. So
Well, you've
I've
got
got
family
lots of
kind of
places
scattered
around,
around.
yeah.
Yeah, you could go visit lots of places.
and
Well,
my-
Tom, I sure want to, I also do want to say that Tom has been very gracious to donate several pictures of the planes that he flew, and also he's donated 3 books. 2 books have to do with the cruises that he was on and shows all of the squadron members and that type of thing. And then also he's donated a book that will go with his recording back to the Library of Congress. And the 3rd book is on his boot camp and who all was in his boot camp. So we thank you very much for your generosity on giving us those documents to send in with your interview. And Tom, I want to thank you for coming today and for being part of the Veterans History Project and for telling us about your life.
You're
And
very welcome.
I especially want to thank you for being willing to go into harm's way, even though luckily you didn't have to get involved in the actual fighting. Still, you were in the service during the time that you certainly could have been called to go into that.
Well, that reminds me of an interesting little story.
Okay.
When we were doing the shipping reconnaissance and going across the international date line, all of our flight schedules were top secret and not normally posted until the day of the flight. And we'd get out there, we'd cross the international date line, Moscow, Mali would come up on the radio, and she'd identify our crew, she'd name us all by name, saying hello and all this sort of thing. Are you enjoying your flight? And how they got this information, I have no idea.
So kind of a modern day Tokyo Rose, really.
Exactly.
I'll be darned. I'll be darned. That is interesting and kind of scary too, isn't it?
Yeah.
It sure is. Well, Tom, thank you for being willing to go and put yourself in harm's way. I'm glad that it didn't turn out that you had any bullets fired at you, but you were certainly in the service and were there if they'd have called you into that.
Yes.
And so we know that freedom isn't free. Our freedoms were bought and paid for by men who are willing to go into harm's way and fight for the freedoms that we enjoy in this country. So I can tell you that I treasure my freedoms, and I want to thank you
You're quite welcome.
for the freedom that I have, and thank you for the service that you've given to our country.
You're quite welcome.
Okay, thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you.